We're here with Nick DeIuliis, CEO of CNX Corporation. You've worked for a number of energy companies over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about your current company?
Sure, Todd. CNX Resources is Pittsburgh-based in Western Pennsylvania, one of the largest producers of natural gas in the Appalachian Basin. The prior versions of our company and corporation have been around since when Lincoln was inaugurated as president. So it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, public corporation in Western Pennsylvania. We've got a very proud history. Originally started back in the day as Consolidation Coal Company, a coal mining entity. And in the early 90s, we started to evolve a business segment where we were capturing coal bed methane from the coal seams and selling it as a second product in energy production. And slowly over time that grew. And about 4 years ago, we spun and split the coal business from the natural gas business, and CNX Resources is the natural gas segment today.
How many wells does CNX operate? How many employees do they have?
The company has really grown through the years and mirrored really what was going on with respect to the shale revolution, not just in Western Pennsylvania, Northeast Pennsylvania, but also West Virginia and Eastern Ohio. If you look at the company today, we've got somewhere in the 450 employee range. That includes both our team that's operating our gas wells and drilling and completion operations with the Marcellus and the Utica formations. And it also includes our team that is focused on operating our midstream pipelines and compressor stations, which we also own and operate. We're an integrated producer of natural gas.
How many of those employees are based in Pennsylvania?
I'd say the majority of them are. And when you look at whether they're West Virginia or Ohio or Pennsylvania based, this is an industry, not just with the employee base, but also with the contractor and service providers that we work with that can number in the thousands. This is an industry that truly pays what I would call family sustaining compensation packages. So just looking at our own company, which I know best, but I think it's pretty emblematic of what's going on across the industry, our all-in compensation packages, when you include 401k, healthcare, et cetera, they exceed $150,000 per person per year, which again, you can sustain and build a family off of, which is great for the region.
As the average price of natural gas has fallen in the recent years, can you talk about how that has affected the industry?
Yeah, no, this is a much discussed topic that you're bringing up. You're right. Natural gas pricing, and it's always been volatile. It's always been cyclical in the industry, but it's seen a portion of the cycle where prices are depressed. And the biggest single driver to that is basically the success of the industry itself. We've become a victim of our own success, which is leading, I think, to a reckoning. And this isn't anything new in industry. If you look at what happened with automobile manufacturing after Henry Ford made his innovations, there were hundreds of car manufacturers, and then they condensed and consolidated down to a few. Same with microchips, software. Anytime you see disruptive, innovative technology come on the scene, you see the ability to prolifically produce the widget, so to speak, which in this case is the methane molecule. And as that supply has gone up and the cost has come down to produce it, it takes a while for demand to catch up to the supply. And you see periods where prices are depressed. So this is a good sign. I think a lot in the industry may not realize it, but this is exactly what we'd all hoped for, say 10 years ago when we first embarked upon the shale revolution. And this is what happens time and time again across a whole range of industries when you've got disruptive, innovative technology that suddenly appears on the scene.
As gas prices fall, how does that affect your well operations and production in PA? Are there less wells drilled? Are there fewer wells in operation?
So to some extent, the activity set and the activity pace of the industry is going to mirror and follow the price curve. But I'll also tell you that in another way, it really brings to fore the idea, the concept that this industry, sometimes called drilling or sometimes called mining of natural gas, right? It's a manufacturing endeavor more and more today. So the ability to systemically and consistently produce very economic quantities of natural gas on a per well and well after well basis. And now that the pipeline infrastructure and the downstream manufacturing facilities like the petrochemical facilities and the cracker facilities are being built around this great sort of innovation, now you're seeing more of a manufacturing mode. And whenever you're a manufacturer, right, of a commodity, even a commodity that's vital to our quality of life like natural gas, you want to be the low-cost producer. So this ties into the reckoning that I spoke about earlier with the industry, where really now the name of the game is not so much exploration and not so much growth of natural gas production for growth's sake, but more importantly, can you day in and day out establish that you're the low-cost producer of natural gas? If you can do that, you're going to be the survivor.
On your personal website, you have a quote: "Carbon is the foundation of life in modern society. To be anti-carbon is to be anti-human." Can you talk about that statement for a bit?
Yeah, that's just science and fact. And unfortunately, that statement, which is based in science and fact today, often flies in stark contrast to the rhetoric and the ideology that you hear out there when it comes to carbon. Carbon is a wonderful thing, perhaps the most important thing that brought mankind to its current quality of life across the globe. So if you just think about carbon intensity levels, whenever CO2 levels or CO2 emissions of a nation or a region increase over history, some other things come along with it. So rising utilization of carbon has also driven rising life expectancies across those countries, regions, and continents. It's driven infant mortality rates down. It's increased education because people have access to education at that point when you have access to electricity. And when you have increased education, it increases individual rights, whether it's female individual rights or a whole host of other individual rights across the globe. And by the way, the corollary to that is that the exact opposite occurs. When you suddenly restrict access to energy or access to carbon, and we've seen certain economies or nations or regions where that's occurred, the exact opposite occurs. Suddenly life expectancies plummet, infant mortality rates go up, individual rights get stifled. So we've got a scoreboard across a range of nations and regions and economies over 150 plus years that shows the quicker you get people access to affordable, reliable electricity, and that usually translates to carbon utilization, really good things happen to individuals and to societies.
You wouldn't deny that carbon is a byproduct of burning fossil fuels. What's the best way to filter that byproduct from the atmosphere, from the environment?
Interesting. Another great question. So you've got this view of wanting to manage or maintain carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere as carbon is utilized for power generation and home heating and a host of other uses across society. Interestingly, a lot of the policies that aim to address that, things like the Paris Climate Accord or renewable wind and solar standards that are set for certain states or regions or countries, that so much of the power comes from these sources which aren't as reliable or low cost as natural gas. It flies again in the face of the facts. So if you look over, say, 12-year periods, and we can look at Pennsylvania or we can look at the United States in total, but taking Pennsylvania first, somewhere from like a 2005 to a 2017 time period. So that's about a 12-year window. The utilization of natural gas in the power grid in Pennsylvania went from about 5% back in 2005 to about 34 to 35% in 2017. So the use of natural gas, which is a carbon-based fuel, skyrocketed in Pennsylvania. CO2 emissions over that same 12-year period in Pennsylvania declined by 39%. And
is that because of coal being displaced a little bit?
So that's because of this more efficient natural gas fire generation, basically taking a more prominent role in the power grid. You're exactly right. And if you looked at Pennsylvania, it would have been if it was a standalone nation of its own, it would be the only industrialized nation that would have met its Paris Accord targets on its own. And it didn't do it with renewable standards. It didn't do it with wind or solar or all the subsidy that we throw on them. It did it on the back of natural gas. If you take the United States in total and you look at a period of around 2007 to say a 2019 time period, another 12-year window, CO2 intensity in the United States declined 14%. Again, largely on the back of utilization of natural gas. So, and I think if you looked at that in the context of the Paris Accord, the United States would lead all industrialized nations with CO2 reduction over that period. So natural gas, again, looking at the facts and looking to the scoreboard, it's already got a very relevant, very recent history over the past 12 years of significantly reducing CO2 intensity, not just for the Commonwealth, but also for the United States.
What impact would Pennsylvania joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative have on the natural gas industry?
Well, I think that concept is not a good one, not just for the natural gas industry, but for all Pennsylvanians. I think it's bad for the middle class. I think it's bad for our building trades. I think it's obviously bad for a whole host of industries from natural gas to manufacturing. And here's the reasons why. Again, going back to my prior comment, we don't need subsidy or portfolio standards or protected markets to reduce carbon dioxide intensity in the Commonwealth. We've already made tremendous strides there to the tune of 39%, as I said, over a 12-year period, on the back of natural gas, with the free market dictating the best source of energy and the most reliable source of energy to be utilized. You start getting into subsidies or protected markets or mandating solar or wind, there's a couple problems with that. First, the cost of power generation, one way or another, is going to go up. Somebody has to pay for that. And that, in many ways, since everybody utilizes energy, is a giant regressive tax. It's going to fall on the backs of people that can least afford to pay it. Two, the lifeblood of our Commonwealth for generations has been manufacturing, middle class, family sustaining wages. The industries that use or rely on energy, either producing it or to utilize it to drive their manufacturing processes, they would be penalized because of this on a competitive basis to manufacturers in other states or other nations. And that obviously doesn't help anyone, from the middle class to the balance of revenues for the state with respect to budget. And three, I think we've got some examples of what that ends up looking like. I mean, that is basically following the path of New York. And last time I checked, New York is a bit of a basket case when it comes to its fiscal situation, when it comes to its job growth situation, when it comes to an exodus of all of its producers and doers trying to get out of state. That should not be what we're trying to run to. That should be what we're trying to run away from. And I guess California would be the other exemplar of what happens when you start embracing these types of things. And last time I checked, California is in for a tough road in the coming years.
Let's turn to the governor's most recent severance tax proposal. What's different and what's the same?
I think similar positioning from the governor on what he's asking for. I mean, the numbers may change, but the concept or the ideology is about the same. And my big issue there is really that natural gas, there's an implied assumption with what's being proposed that natural gas is not paying its fair share, that we're different in Pennsylvania and that we're getting sort of a quote unquote free ride relative to what other gas producing states pay in the form of severance tax. And that is simply not true, because we're getting caught up in wordsmithing. Again, I want to go back to, it's the engineer in me. I want to go back to the facts and the data. If you look at the scoreboard again, there's not a severance tax in Pennsylvania. That's because we call it an impact fee. And the impact fee that was instituted in 2012 is cumulatively now across the natural gas industry. It'll approach, I think this summer, a $2 billion cumulative payment to the state. 60% of that goes to the local communities where the natural gas development is occurring, and 40% of it goes to sort of what I call the general fund across the Commonwealth. The $2 billion cumulatively coming up this summer from what we call an impact fee, that's a big number, and that's a quantifiable number. That's tangible, that's real dollars. Just as an example, CNX Resources, my company, since the implementation of the impact fee, we're approaching $80 million that we paid. Again, 60% of that going to local communities. So I point to those numbers, and then my question becomes one of, show me another industry, show me another sector of the Commonwealth's economy that is invested that much into local communities and into the state in total. And you can compare us to the education sector, you can compare higher education, you can compare us to the medical profession, right? The medical centers, you can compare us to really any industry you'd like. And we are more than paying our fair share. We're a net provider in a big way to revenues to the state's funding.
According to State Impact PA, the Commonwealth is the only major gas producing state that doesn't have a natural gas severance tax. Are all the other states wrong?
No, the other states, instead of calling it an impact fee, are calling it a severance tax, right? Instead of us calling it a severance tax, we've called it an impact fee. So to us, to the person that's out there owning a business or running a business within this industry, call it what you want. In the end, you're cutting a check that is going to be invested into local communities where you're operating, which is a great thing, and to the state in total. And when you add that up, again, under the term of a quote unquote impact fee, instead of calling it a severance tax, it's approaching $2 billion this summer across the industry. So I call it, a tax or a investment that we make. You can call it impact fee or you can call it severance tax, but it's $2 billion across the industry coming up this summer.
But as the price of gas drops, the impact fee drops. Wouldn't a severance tax represent a more consistent form of revenue for the state?
Yeah, so most of these taxes, impact fee is certainly an example of that too, where it fluctuates with gas price. So it's a percentage of gas price. Gas prices go up or activity increases, the revenue from the impact fee or the severance tax would increase, and as prices decline or activity declines, the opposite would occur. That's just basically trying to find a way to mimic what's going on with the cycles. That's like a sales tax. It's inevitable that it's going to track some level of volume or activity.
I read somewhere that West Virginia's rate by comparison is 5% and Pennsylvania's rate is lower than that with the current impact fee. Should they be the same? Should the rate be a little bit higher these days for taxing gas?
Yeah, I think what would, from my perspective, make the most sense is to stack up the consistency across industries and the consistency across policy. So here's what I mean by those two statements. Be happy to put our scorecard of the natural gas industry, again, up against any other industry within the Commonwealth. So these are good questions, right? A question of, well, what's the impact fee in Pennsylvania compared to, say, the severance tax in Texas, West Virginia, or whichever state has it? Let's see how that adds up. But let's also see, right, since we're making decisions about taxing within the Commonwealth, let's also take a look at how the natural gas industry stacks up to other industries and whether these other industries or other areas of the economy are paying their fair share or if they're paying anything at all. My view is that many of those industries or sectors might be net subsidy sort of consumers, not providers of net revenue. So there's an issue within Pennsylvania itself as to not just what should the level be for the natural gas industry, but how does the natural gas industry stack up to other industries when it comes to contributing to the state's economy via tax or other. And by the way, all these numbers exclude, right, corporate income tax that the industry pays and personal income tax with all those wages and benefits that we're paying people that work within the sector. The second thing on this policy question really gets to an inconsistency that I'm confused about. We hear about how the natural gas industry is basically contributing these revenue streams into local communities and to the state in general, which is great and which is awesome, and how there's an argument that we need to do more. But then on the flip side of that, the next day or maybe within the same day, we hear very many of these same sort of policy makers or politicians say that we need to implement standards where renewables, so to speak, wind or solar, need to have protected market within our grid. To me, those two things don't make sense. If natural gas is a vital driver of our foundational economy, which it is, and you're looking to that to be a growing revenue stream for our tax base, which it is, why would you ever institute policies on the other side of the equation that's going to consciously deter or limit the growth of natural gas utilization within the state? Those two things don't make sense to me. So there's a bit of an inconsistency argument too. I don't understand how the two sort of peacefully or logically coexist.
If the governor knows he can't get a natural gas tax through the General Assembly, why does he keep proposing it every year?
I think when you just sort of look at the sound bites or the ideology or rhetoric, it's a popular thing. It's an easy thing to say. You have to dig a little deeper and look into, again, the facts and the data. So, not knowing that there is an impact fee or ignoring that and the $2 billion that it's about to generate for the state makes sort of sentences or sound bites easy to state. I think also, and I think this is changing quite a bit. I think for a long time there has been a misunderstanding within the state, just the normal Pennsylvanian, about how extensive the natural gas economy is. It used to be not long ago that most people in Philadelphia or most people in Harrisburg thought of the natural gas industry as something that was happening up in remote Northeast Pennsylvania or Western Pennsylvania. And then the pipeline infrastructure build out occurred, and you started to see more of that investment and employment happening across the state. And then, as I said, the power grid and the wider economy and manufacturing started to be resurrected and utilized natural gas in a much bigger way. And then all the restaurants and home industry, home building industry, et cetera, started to grow off of these dynamics because of the workers and what our employees and team members are earning in the wage department. And suddenly, now I think there's a broadening realization that, hey, this is a really important pillar, perhaps the most important pillar of the Commonwealth's economy. Let's not kill it in our zest to try to solve another issue or another problem, as compelling as it might be.
You mentioned the Keystone Pipeline earlier. How will President Biden's executive order affect how we get gas to the market?
That's another great question. A lot of executive orders in the past couple of weeks with President Biden and the administration. I think when you look at Pennsylvania and its economy and the natural gas industry and all the affiliated industries tied to it, I think there's going to be three prongs to sort of pressure or attacks on the industry coming from sort of federal regulation, federal executive orders, whatever the case might be. One is the most traditional. That is, looking toward regulations that up the standards with respect to producing natural gas or access to producing natural gas. That's always been the case historically. The industry has proven time and time again it can rise to the occasion. So that's going to be a challenge, but I've got a lot of confidence that the industry will be able to handle that and manage it very efficiently. The second prong is what you brought up with your question about Keystone. And to me, this is a really troubling one. And this is a very conscious effort through regulation, through the administrative state, through executive orders, right? Not through statute that is passed by people elected by the voters, to stifle the demand growth for natural gas via stifling things like pipeline investment, pipeline build out. That's a really bad thing because once again, when you look at the free market and you look at the real world, the societies and economies that operate in reality have a growing demand for natural gas. When they start to embrace and utilize that more and more, really great things happen to tax base, to middle class, to CO2 emissions, to all of the above. So when you start to deter that through policy aimed under different sort of cover or auspices, that's worrying. And then the third sort of side of this that I think we'll see an increasing focus upon is with respect to capital access. I think there's going to be a growing level of stringent review of how natural gas producers or pipeline companies or people in the energy space, so to speak, can access capital, whether it's debt or equity in the capital markets. Now, that one's interesting because, again, going back to the manufacturing concept, if you're the low-cost producer, like we are in the Appalachian Basin, you generate free cash flow on your own. You really don't have a need for tapping the debt markets or the equity markets. And if you start to stifle that for other producers, it's going to reduce the supply of natural gas, which could increase the price of natural gas. So there might be some unintended consequences to that sort of third leg of this pressure that we'll see from the administration. But the Keystone, if that's sort of kicking things off, I think that was a really sad day for the building trades. I think it was a sad day for a lot of different sort of family sustaining industries all across the United States. And again, I think it was rhetoric and ideology sort of trumping the realities of what we would have to gain by allowing that project to continue.
Should state and federal governments be as focused as they are on climate change?
So look, climate change is absolutely occurring. Climate has been changing for thousands of years, right? Before mankind even learned how to unleash the carbon atom and the methane molecule. That's clear. Now, as to what the role is of man-made activity when it comes to climate change, that's a very complicated question that PhD modelers have been trying to capture for decades. That's beyond my abilities to try to bracket or articulate. But when you look at what the major concerns or threats are to the common voter or the middle class worker in Pennsylvania across the nation, it doesn't keep me up at night. What keeps me up at night are a host of other issues, right? Pandemic, if you're a small business owner, how are we going to get our businesses back up and functioning and opening? How are we going to make sure that our kids can read, write, and do arithmetic on a 4th grade, 8th grade, and college level? That has been, in many instances, a big problem that often gets ignored. I've got a host of other concerns and issues that are worrying me and making me lose sleep at night well before something like climate change. So if in our path to address that, we start to lose the focus on these other issues, or worse yet, harm them even more, if we're harming the middle class, if we're harming employment, if we're harming our fiscal budget deficits, if we're advantaging a China that's more and more looking to us as the enemy, those are really bad things. Yeah, I was talking to someone in the building trades not long ago, and they had a really interesting quip. Their view was one of, they were going back and saying, Marie Antoinette had the quote of let them eat cake. He says, it's almost with these policies that it's telling our building trades, let them squeegee a solar panel that is manufactured in China. And that cannot be a good thing, net for the middle class, Pennsylvania, or the United States.
How much of the gas that's mined in Pennsylvania is consumed in Pennsylvania, and how much is sent to other states or overseas to other countries?
This is probably the greatest story never told. What I mean by that is, if you look at the state, we're producing somewhere around 7 trillion cubic feet of natural gas a year. Now, you hear 7 trillion cubic feet, that sounds impressive, but just to put that in context, 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas is enough to basically heat 15 million homes for an entire year. So we're producing 7 times that a year in state. And we only use about 1.5 to 1.6 trillion cubic feet of that 7. So the balance is exported. Now, what's really cool about this is that we become sort of the breadbasket of energy, not just for the United States, but for the world. So where is the balance of that natural gas going? Where are we exporting it to? Well, some of it is being exported to other states. So when you look at the Southeast United States, right, they've basically retooled their economy to function off of natural gas produced right here. So we are powering all the growing economies and sectors of the economy in the Southeast United States. It's also increasingly being exported to international locations through liquefied natural gas, what's called LNG. So what's happening is our natural gas is produced here in Pennsylvania. It's being transported to pipeline to places like Maryland on the coast. It's being liquefied and put on a vessel, a ship, and that ship is going to places like Japan. It's going to Europe, places like Poland. It's going to India, and it's basically being regasified where that natural gas is being utilized. So when you start thinking about this, you've got our blue collar workers, our trades in Pennsylvania, that they're getting up every morning to go to work, right? And by the way, these individuals work entirely through the pandemic because natural gas is so vital to our economy. Didn't miss a beat through the pandemic. And they're helping to, quote unquote, manufacture that methane molecule. That methane molecule is likely to end up being exported to somewhere like Poland, protect Poland against the Russian bear when Putin wants to have his way with Western Europe. It's being exported to India to bring hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty because they'll have access to reliable electricity. And it's being exported to places like Japan, where it will be able to have energy security to secure itself from a very aggressive China. So the geopolitics of what's going on within our own state with our everyday workers who are showing up every day to go to work and manufacture this methane molecule, it's not just something that's driving and making a difference in our local economies, it's making a difference in redrawing the geopolitical map across the globe. And again, I think that's the greatest story that's never been told. It's unbelievable to what extent that either gets ignored or missed by individuals and by sort of the elite class when they're trying to come up with policy and figure out what we should do next.
Well, that'll have to be the last word. Nick DeIuliis, CEO of CNX Corporation. Thanks for speaking with us today.
Hey, thank you, Todd, and take care.